5 fascinating stories for the AL Central. I guess we got a 6th story coming in from a different division. We got breaking news right before we go live on the air here at the OK Baseball Podcast. Welcome into the show if you're just joining us for the first time as we ring in our 4th episode here of the offseason and of this new and improved baseball podcast here at Slasher Sports with partnership from Jays from the Couch. We got some breaking news right off the bat here. Sean bringing it in. We got some good news. You saw the tweet. Go ahead and let us know what that is.
Yeah, apparently the San Diego Padres are not done adding to their offense, adding the guy who just refuses to age in Nelson Cruz. 1-year deal for a whopping, get ready, $1 million.
Ooh, man. Hey, I'll take that $1 million. But in baseball terms, that's a really small contract, if you will. That's very low, especially for a guy like Nelson Cruz. For the most part, that's basically veteran minimum, if you will. What that screams right off the bat for me is, yes, they're going to take a flyer on Nelson Cruz, see if they can help with his offense production, just be a DH for a really strong team that's already good offensively, that's already built and grabbed a lot of good free agents this year. I mean, we're talking Xander Bogaerts. We just had Juan Soto come in last year. This team could be stacked offensively, could be its own West Coast murderers row, if you will. But if it doesn't work out, it could really just turn into what we saw with Robinson Cano last year. It could be an easy DFA candidate. You're not really losing anything. You're not going to lose sleep if you have to DFA a $1 million veteran guy like Nelson Cruz. So all win, all no risk really for the Padres. But if it does work out, could be exactly what they need to get maybe over the edge in that NL West, Sean.
It could be. And you know what, from his perspective, you're looking at possibly the last season of your career, and you want to go and play for somebody who's got a real chance to bring you off into the sunset on a parade that hopefully does better than, what was it, Atlanta's parade where the buses were going like 80 through the streets.
Hey, the sunsets just outside on San Clemente aren't too bad in San Diego. I mean,
that's right.
There is a way worse place to play than over in Gaslamp Quarter at Petco Park. There's just some really good places. That's just a fantastic ballpark. And what they're doing to the culture there in San Diego, I mean, you gotta love. I mean, people love to go watch baseball there right now. For the last 4 or 5 years, it has been. Since Tatis really built up, you bring over Machado, now you bring Soto. How can you not love what San Diego's doing? Then you add in a guy who can just hit bombs. And I know you and I are an old folk. We're not the ones who are really into the whole home runs as much as maybe say a 15, 17, 20-year-old guy that's paying attention to the MLB this time. But that's where the game is going to. Higher offense. Yeah. They've put the shift restriction on. You put a guy like Nelson Cruz. Hey, we just saw it with Albert Pujols last year. He had his best season, and it was his going out season. We're going to talk about an old guy later on as we talk about our AL Central preview here. But I like this Nelson Cruz for the Padres only because, like I said, no risk for the Padres. All reward if it can happen.
Yeah, it's basically, league minimum. I mean, just north of that, it's not that much more, right? League minimum on a guy who has a track record almost as good, if not better, than mostly everybody still playing the game of baseball. So I like the deal. I like that Nelson Cruz gets a chance to play for a contender, to go for a championship in his final year. If it is his final year, I assume it is. I think, it's win-win for everybody involved. Win-win for even the fans of the San Diego Padres, getting somebody who, at the later end of their career, but can still contribute. I think it's good. I think a good deal all around.
All right. Well, let's dig into this now, give them the reason why we are here. I mean, this is 2 weeks in a row. We had breaking news last week with the Rafael Devers extension. We had to get that at the beginning of the episode. And then now we talk about Nelson Cruz, obviously a little bigger last week, but still some pretty big news coming out of the NL West. We're going to get to the NL West with our next episode. We'll get that to you coming here soon. But let's finish off the Centrals and this week we are talking about the American League Central. If you missed our episode last week of the NL Central, feel free to go on back. This is our fourth division we are covering now. We took the East. We took care of those earlier. We're going east to west. We're going coast to coast on these episodes. We're going to finish off the Central with this one. And another breaking news thing that came in this week, a saga finally comes to an end, if you will, this offseason. What a crazy offseason for this guy, Carlos Correa. I mean, I can't really hide the name. If you're following baseball, you know what's going on with this Carlos Correa situation. He signs with the Giants pending physical fails. Now, you're not even supposed to get these physical results out into the real world and why you didn't sign. But not only did it happen once, it happened twice with New York Mets. They get signed in a contract. They also don't wind up getting the final deal because of the failed physical. He winds up heading back to Minnesota on I think a pretty nice deal. I'm really excited to talk about this. 6 years, $200 million, a couple of vesting options in there that could wind up turning into a 10-year $270 if all of them are fulfilled. Carlos Correa returning to the Twins after a crazy saga in the offseason. That's where we're going to start first. We're going to start Twin City. What is your thoughts on Correa returning to Minnesota?
Oh, man. I think when you talk about some people take the shortcuts in life, some people take the long road. Carlos Correa took the most scenic and bumpy road possible to land back in Minnesota. And I think, it almost makes sense, right? Because this whole old injury that somehow 8 years later is all of a sudden a concern. The Twins are familiar with Carlos Correa, more recently than anybody, and they had no issue. So as long as the door was still open, you kind of felt like Minnesota was still in the mix. What I think is even more interesting, leave aside, Carlos Correa trying to navigate the emotional turmoil of what this is doing to his family and all of that stuff. And, you gotta, even though people will say, well, he's making $200 million, don't really feel bad for him. But he's still a human being with a family that he has to consider, right? And this is not, I'm sure, been easy on him. But what I do really like about this deal for the Twins is that he was at 11 years, $330 million with the Giants, and that went down to when it went to the Mets, and now it landed in a much more palatable contract for the Minnesota Twins. And so that, for me, I think is kids, if you can take one lesson from this offseason, patience is a virtue.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at this contract, yes, the AAV is higher for Correa in this Twins contract compared to the other ones. Obviously, I'm sure he would have rather had a contract with the Giants, a contract with the Mets. He wouldn't want his third choice with the Twins. And unfortunately, that's really what we're seeing here. I think he wanted a bigger market. And you're right. You talk about family, you talk about places to live and to play. San Francisco is a nice place to live. New York is a nice place to live if you want. And I'm not saying that Minneapolis isn't a great place to live, but when you look at it compared to those other major markets, there's a reason why the Twins only offered him a 6-year, $200 million contract. Now, when I say earlier that there's some vesting options that can turn into 10 years, $270, there's a couple ones where if he reaches a certain threshold with plate appearances, he can automatically vest and get a $30 million contract for his next season, 2029, I believe that's when that 7th year comes into play. For 2030, it becomes a $25 million contract, all the way down till a $10 million contract on that 10th year. So it winds up being $270 if all is fulfilled. I'm not sure if that happens. Obviously, the team can decide to give them the option without those vesting options if it does happen. But either way, Carlos Correa is going to be a Minnesota Twin for at least the next 6 years. If you put it all together, I think this is a fun stat. This is something really funny to put into terms here. If you put it all together, his offseason, Carlos Correa agreed to 31 years for $865 million this year. That's, I mean, he really was working this year. No other player in the history of baseball has put some contracts for 31 years, almost to a close $1 billion, right? I'm sure he would love to have all those contracts right now, but he's only going to get 6 for 200 million, just a measly $200 million, Sean.
He simultaneously had the best offseason in Major League Baseball history.
Yeah, when you think Scott Boras couldn't do any better.
That's right. And then also had the worst in that, two major deals fall through. You know what? I mean, at the end of the day, Carlos Correa is a special player and a special talent, and the Minnesota Twins were looking to be in rough shape after losing him. So, for their sake and for his, I'm glad that the saga is over and all of that stuff, and I'm glad that that they were able to come to an agreement, and the Twins ended up saving some money, perhaps in the process. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that even matters in this AL Central division, because I think we'll get into it obviously team by team, but I think that we're looking at a 2-team race, and the Twins needed Carlos Correa for that race.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. We're definitely going to talk more Twins as we finish this preview here. But one last thing on Carlos Correa. Obviously, the reason he didn't sign with San Francisco and with the Mets is because that failed physical. We found out it's because of an old injury in his ankle that happened at 19 years old. The surgery, according to the physical, says it's going to disintegrate during his seasons 7-8 years from now. So those 11-year contracts is what really made the question mark. That's why the Twins went with the 6-year contract, if you will. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense in aspects to that physical. Now, are you worried about this? If you're a Minnesota Twins fan, or if you're just a baseball fan just paying attention to Carlos Correa for the next 6 years, are you worried about Carlos Correa as the player offensively, and most importantly, as an everyday shortstop for the team?
No, I wouldn't say I'm worried at all, actually. And I think that realistically speaking, when you're talking about an injury 8 years ago, that's tough to, you can't predict, right? And I think that's, for in fairness to the Twins and the Giants, that's part of the issue, is that they couldn't predict, whether or not that would be an issue down the road. But if you're the Minnesota Twins and you commit $200 million to a player, you better be damn sure that that you're fine with their medical records and all of that stuff. And if you hedge your bets by by only signing him for 6 years, then okay, then maybe you do see the issue as well. For me, over the next 6 years, I'm not concerned with whether or not he can stay healthy, and I don't think the Twins are either. No more so than anybody else on their roster. They should be more concerned about Byron Buxton than Carlos Correa.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, Byron Buxton has had some injury issues when he's healthy, though. One of the best outfielders in baseball. Speaking of big contracts like Byron Buxton with this guaranteed contract for Carlos Correa will be the largest guaranteed contract in Minnesota Twins history, now beating the Joe Meyer contract extension. That was $188 million. I believe is 188. So the $200 million will take the top. Byron Buxton is number 3 with that $100 million. Guaranteed. All right, let's talk about this Minnesota Twins team. They've also added some 2 other players in this one, both with some, I think you could say question marks for some curious things. Really excited could be. Let's talk about the one I think who could be, I think has the most to prove, maybe not just on this Minnesota Twins squad, but maybe in all of baseball, and that's Joey Gallo. Joey Gallo had a rough year with New York Yankees, winds up getting traded to the Dodgers. Things didn't really pan out either way. He's got a lot of things to work on. I don't know if the shift restriction is going to help or make it better. We got to get him back to that Texas Ranger vibe, to where he was at when he was, obviously his strikeout rate was still really high, but he hit a lot of home runs. I'm sure that's exactly what Minnesota Twins are looking for, to get a Nelson Cruz of their own, if they will. Speaking of a Nelson Cruz who used to be with the Twins, that's exactly what they're probably hoping for Joey Gallo. Do you see a resurrection happening in Minneapolis for this team?
Oh my goodness. Joey Gallo is the ultimate risk.
Oh, for
really.
Sure.
Realistically speaking, you've got a guy who has done great things in the past, prolific power in the past. Yes, he strikes out a lot, but when you're hitting 40, 45 bombs a year, you can live with that. The problem is that Joey Gallo hasn't really even been doing that. Right. So last year we're looking at a really miserable season. And I looked up just out of curiosity, because when you're looking at what could this look like for both sides moving forward. So I looked up his projections for 2023, and they do not scream sign Joey Gallo. So we're looking at 21 home runs projected. Okay. Sure. That's not nothing. But that's the icing on a really, really disgusting cake right now. Projected to hit 188 after hitting 160 last year. His strikeout rate is projected to be almost 40% at 39.8. Joey Gallo is all about the home run. And if he's not hitting home runs, 21 home runs is not enough for me as a fan of baseball, let alone of the Minnesota Twins. But I don't know that it's enough to justify that risk, especially in a division where realistically the Twins have a shot at taking the whole division. And so it's a big risk, in my opinion. It's a big risk to put their eggs in the Joey Gallo basket. Fingers crossed for the guy, because you hate to see what really boggles the mind in baseball, almost more than any other sport, is how a player can just drop off the face of the earth as far as their performance goes from one season to the next, and then just have the talent is there and the whatevers, but for some reason, the Chuck Knoblauchs of the world, just for some reason something happens and it just falls apart for them. So you like to see Joey Gallo getting a shot, but man, it wouldn't be me if I had designs on a division title. It wouldn't be me, that's for sure.
When you talk about that strikeout rate, almost 40% is this projection. League average is around 28%. So if you want to put that into context, that's just absurd. If you're projecting to almost strike out almost half of your at bats, that just can't happen. Especially if your projections for home runs are not as high as you expect, and you need to get on base. That is really the biggest thing. You need home runs. Don't really come into that play that much, no matter where you go in the lineup. Now, my thing about Joey Gallo is that we've seen this happen a time or two in the past, where a player doesn't do well in New York, in the Bronx. They have a hard time. A big name player will come over to New York and just not do well. They'll head back to maybe a mid-market team, if you want to call it what you will, or just a team that's not that doesn't have a New York or a Los Angeles in front of their name, and then do quite well. They find themselves again. They get out of the limelight. They don't have to worry about the media, the crucial media, the scrutiny of New York media, if you will. Now, we didn't get to really see it as much as we'd hope in LA, but obviously that's going from one big market to the other. I mean, the truest big markets. I don't know if he really had a chance to catch his breath. I'm curious to see if he will in Minnesota. And just because we saw it in Texas, we knew the strikeout rates were high in Texas. When he got traded to New York, they knew that as well. He was a trade deadline candidate, and they wound up keeping him for the years of control as well. I'm curious. This is a nice prove it year for them. If he can do it again, this is another great aspect. This is going to make Minnesota be exactly where they need to be in the AL Central. I'm not saying he's going to be the inflection point where he is the reason why the Twins are the AL Central champions. If I am going to predict that, I'll let you know at the end of the show. But I think there is a prime opportunity here for him to get back to where he can be. It's just curious to see if he does. We have seen it happen before. But is Joey Gallo going to fall in that category?
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating, and I'll be watching that. I think you're right. I don't think Joey Gallo will be the reason why the Twins win the division if they do. But I do think giving him too much playing time could be the reason why they lose it. That has a big impact, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how much they rely on Joey Gallo and how much of a leash they give him to be himself, right? Because if you're going to allow Joey Gallo to be himself, you're going to have to accept the strikeouts. So the question is, for how long? How long is Minnesota going to continue to say, okay, well, we'll it is part of his game, and we accept, all the apples bruised and all, if it makes a good pie. The question is whether that pie is going to be turn out the way they intended.
Yeah, very true. Speaking of Joey Gallo, it's really sad to see the apple fall from the tree. When speaking of apples and stuff, I got to be an apple pie since we're on that conversation. But when you talk about him being really an all-star, a superstar in Texas, and then head to New York and struggle, it sucks seeing that from any kind of player. Now we're talking about him potentially not just being a fringe starter, but potentially being a fringe DFA candidate. And we could see that happen in the future for a guy like Joey Gallo. If it doesn't turn out, if the strikeouts and they decide they just want to move on, yeah, they could totally see that happening. I think we have a lot of fringe players this year with some hefty names included. with them. And I think this is going to be a very interesting spring training. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about with some position battles that maybe we weren't expecting to talk about in this offseason, including some certain names that are aging or just not panning out the way we think they would. And Joey Gallo certainly falls in that category for me. All right, the other guy that comes in to Minnesota is the catching position. They get rid of Gary Sanchez. He decides he moves on from free agency. He's still unsigned, by the way. He came over in a trade. Yeah, right. He came over in a trade from the New York Yankees. It seems like Minnesota Twins got rid of almost everyone in that trade. Gio Urshela was traded. Gary Sanchez was traded. So it's just now it looks like the Yankees are. When you talk about who won that trade, a lot of people think, well, they don't have Urshela and Sanchez no more. I guess the Yankees won the trade. Well, the Yankees also still have Josh Donaldson's paycheck in contract. So I'm still giving the win to Minnesota for who won that trade. But Christian Vasquez comes over from Boston via Houston, if you will, after trade deadline. This is a good catcher. I think this can really help the team's rotation. We saw him for years in Boston. It was weird seeing him in a Houston jersey for the second half of the season. I think almost as weird as seeing Trey Mancini as an Oriole fan myself. However, this is going to look really weird seeing him in a Minnesota jersey for a full season. But I like the pickup. I think it was a much needed addition. I think the catching position for Minnesota is very good now. My question is, and I think I kind of already answered this, and I think I already know your answer as a Jays fan and a Gary Sanchez just lover. Is this a better upgrade than Gary Sanchez from last season?
Oh my God. The Minnesota Twins could literally put a folding chair and a garbage bin behind the plate, and that would be a better option because at least the garbage bin is going to catch the ball, right? Like as a catcher, more than any other position, you have one job. It's literally in the title of your position. You have to catch the ball. And that's where Gary Sanchez struggled. Yes, he could hit home runs, but he couldn't do anything else. That is where and that's kind of the difference between a Joey Gallo and a Gary Sanchez, right? That at least Joey Gallo still has something else to offer. And I feel bad because I know Gary Sanchez is a human being and all of that stuff with a family. But oh man,
that's why we're here.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I'm not catching 100-mile-an-hour fastball. I can tell you that. Not without going into the fetal position. But regardless, Christian Vasquez, I think, not necessarily in the stat lines or on Fangraphs or in the box score, but Christian Vasquez is somebody as a Blue Jays fan who has annoyed me for years. And it's exactly what I said. It's not that he's going to put up monster numbers or anything like that, but he is going to be annoying for the opposing teams because he's a good catcher. He works well with his pitching staff, and he will come up with some hits now and then, especially when they count. So Christian Vasquez is the kind of guy you love to hate, right? And so for the Twins, I think this is a great pickup. I really like Christian Vasquez as a catcher. I don't think that you need to have a catcher who's going to hit 30 home runs and challenge for a batting title, because when you are the catcher, the focus is defense and handling your pitching staff. And that is something that Christian Vasquez has developed quite a reputation for. And it's certainly something that the Minnesota Twins felt comfortable enough signing him for 3 years, $30 million, right? That's not a small commitment for a catcher. So I think that's a great pickup for them. And I'm really, really enjoying that part of it. Now, whether or not other people have expectations as far as his offensive production and stuff like that, that remains to be seen. But I think you have to kind of be realistic when you're talking about a catcher and their offensive numbers.
I agree. Completely agree. I think Christian Vasquez is easily a top 10 catcher in the league. You could probably make the argument that he could be close to a top 5, if you will. Last really thing about the Twins here, there's obviously some additions. We assume that we're going to see a reduction, a trade, if you will, with longtime outfielder Max Kepler. There's been rumors circling that Kepler may be on the move. Outfielder surplus seems like to be in the need these days. A couple teams looking to maybe trade some pitching. Miami Marlins always come to mind when we talk about outfielder help for pitching. Minnesota could definitely use a rotation piece. I think that's the next step. I think that's if we are going to see the Minnesota Twins starting lineup. I think right now you put Max Kepler in the lineup, but I don't think he's here on opening day. You see Max Kepler on his way out as well?
It's funny because it's been all year. I feel like we've been hearing this idea, not necessarily on the front burner, but certainly on one of the burners of the hot stove, right? You're hearing his name, and why not? 30 home run potential, be a great bat in Miami. For some reason, didn't even put that together until you just said it, and it makes perfect sense, especially because of Minnesota's need for pitching. But if it doesn't happen mid or before the season starts, I think it's going to be something to watch for the trade deadline, because you're right, something's going to have to give, right? Like you can't just not consider it. And if anything, I think what you're seeing teams be way more patient and hold out for the right return for whatever they have available, and whether that's a good strategy or not. It remains to be seen. But I think the Twins are smart if they are considering dealing Kepler to really be patient with it. There's no urgency, I don't think, to rush into something just because there's a fit with Miami or whatever have you. I think more so now and across baseball, you're seeing teams be a little bit more patient, watching the market and waiting for the right deal, as opposed to just, well, this might be the best we're going to get, so we'll just pull the trigger. So I think that if it doesn't happen before the season, I think look for it near the trade deadline. But of course, at that point, who knows? Byron Buxton could be hurt and they can't afford to trade him at all, right? Because I think if you're Minnesota, you got to be thinking that, right? You have to. You got to be thinking about, and I'm not going to get a full season out of Byron Buxton, unfortunately.
Sure hope we do. Because when he's on, he's one of the best players in baseball.
Absolutely.
I completely agree. All right, Sean, I love putting you on the hot seat. That's one of my favorite things to do on this show. So we're going to do something a little different here. I'm going to ask you just for a one-word answer, and then we'll move on. Minnesota Twins last year finished the season 78-84, 78 wins, over or under for this season?
Over.
I'm with you. I also think over as well.
Yeah.
All right, we got someone joining in. Drixley joins in and says, hey, OBP, signing in to watch. Looking forward to a great show. Well, thank you so much for listening in, Drixley. Again, you can listen to us in podcast form, and you can see us on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, and thank you for your comment. Really always appreciate the support. All right, Absolutely. The Cleveland Guardians. Here we go. This was probably one of the funnest teams in baseball to watch last season, based on their prospects, their nice playoff push. It was very fun. The Stephen Kwan experience was just an amazing experience to watch. Let's start there. Stephen Kwan, season 2. What does that look like? What do you expect from him moving forward?
Stephen Kwan was a very interesting guy for me in particular on my fantasy teams. I grabbed him right away at the beginning of the season. And then in one of my leagues, I got rid of him because I had to. And then it was one of the first things I did when the season ended was get him back. I really like this guy. He's certainly not going to challenge for a home run title or anything like that, but he does everything else really well. So I looked up, what could season 2 look like? Well, he's projected at 11 home runs, 16 stolen bases. I think he'll blow past that. I think he's going to get far more than 16. OPS of 773, a weighted runs created plus of 123, which is excellent, considering how little power he actually has, for 3.6 wins above replacement, and the most, important part of his game, 21 defensive runs saved in left field. Like that, we're talking about a special player who does everything. Like, he's Cleveland right now. He's the Guardians baseball right now. Not a lot of power, but does everything else, right? And you know Terry Francona's loving having Stephen Kwan on his roster. So what do I think it would look like? I think more of the same, just with a little bit more confidence. You might see a bit more power, but I think Stephen Kwan is for real, and Cleveland has themselves a little gem in this guy.
Yeah, he's my favorite Guardian by far. When you're talking a WRC plus over 120 for projections, that's always great to hear. Yeah, he's not someone that super impresses you with the home runs or anything like that. But if you
Mhm.
watch every other tool and facet of his game, it's just really fun. He kind of reminds me of like Tommy Edman for the Cardinals in that kind of standpoint, where he's not a big home run hitter, but you watch every other facet of his game and you just can't help but, find a way to put your jaw back up because you're just in
Yeah.
awe. Speaking of the Cleveland Guardians, they did sign a couple players of their own, and these are some pretty interesting names as well. Josh Bell coming over from Washington, San Diego, if you will, Pittsburgh Pirates for a long time. This is a really interesting piece for Cleveland because they kind of rotated through first base a lot. Owen Miller moving on to Milwaukee. Josh Bell, I think, is a very good piece for Cleveland because now they have the corners solidified, if you will. They have a very good potential all-star player in Josh Bell. He's been at the all-star before, and then we have, obviously Jose Ramirez on the other side. The corners are locked for Cleveland. That is something that was obviously is a great thing to have. We see that with top defensive teams. I mean, I keep moving back to the Cardinals, but when you talk about top defensive teams, those corners are locked with Goldschmidt and Arenado. This is something that you can kind of put in comparison to, maybe not fully and defensively, but definitely with offensive production as well. I like this pickup. I think this is a great signing for Cleveland. It shows that they're not afraid to spend money, something they didn't do last year at all. We didn't see that happen. Now we see Josh Bell. I think this is a good game plan by the general management. What's your thoughts about him?
Yeah, I agree. When you finish the way Cleveland finished last season, and you look around the rest of the division, and you literally are head and shoulders above, I think there's no point in not adding a Josh Bell. What'll be interesting for me, Josh Bell is not the best first baseman in the world, and Cleveland also has Josh Naylor, Canadian boy, that we have to consider where's playing time going to go. So if it were me, I'm not too familiar with Josh Naylor and his defensive prowess, but I would say that Josh Bell looking at the DH spot probably more so than first base. But I mean, at the end of the day, you've got two guys, two positions, they'll sort it out, right? It's a good problem to have. And I do like it just simply for the fact that he's a good bat in the lineup, and I think that's something they were missing. I'm not sure that necessarily he's the power that they needed, projected for 22 home runs, which is, it's nothing, but in this day and age, it's still not, you wouldn't call him a power hitter, right? So I think that's the one thing that might be missing. But again, if you're Cleveland, you just win the division. It's very much there for the taking, and then you worry about the other aspects of the game, because I think once you get into the postseason, a team like Cleveland can be very, very scary with how they score the runs and how they play defense and all of that stuff. So I don't know that they necessarily need a power hitter. There are other teams who definitely need a power hitter. I'm not sure that Cleveland is, simply because of how their roster works together already.
Yeah, I think this could be a very fun addition to the team, just based on what you see around the roster and what we saw last season with this young core as well. Adding a guy like Josh Bell, it definitely doesn't hurt. Now, he had some ups and downs, obviously, for a long time. When he got traded over to San Diego, it took him a while to get acclimated. He didn't really do too great in San Diego. He was great in Washington. I mean, there was a reason why he was added in the trade package as well. I like the Josh Bell addition to Cleveland. I know a lot of people, the Cleveland fans, are excited as well. Another addition here, and I know Cleveland fans, Cleveland supporters, I see it on social media all season long. They were talking about how they needed a catching position upgrade. They talked about Austin Hedges, maybe one of the best defensive catcher in all of baseball, but his offensive production just absolutely terrible. We talked about it last week as he signed with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Well, they signed a friendly face for you and I, American East, old Tampa Bay Ray, Mike Zunino. And that guy can hit home runs. We've seen him. He's a versatile player. He's getting a little older in age. I thought Cleveland was going to make a bigger splash with the catching position. I think they fell out of the Sean Murphy trade. I don't think they were ever in contention for Wilson Contreras. I think he knew that he was going to St. Louis, I'm being completely honest. But Mike Zunino, this is a nice little addition for Cleveland. What's your thoughts on him? I think they needed to solidify and upgrade this position. I will say it's an upgrade, but I just don't know if it's as much as an upgrade as they hope.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was going to say. I think they kind of needed bigger from their catching acquisition. Now that's not to say that like Mike Zunino is not anything to sneeze at. He's a good everyday catcher, solid glove. Not so much with the bats, but again, as we said with Christian Vasquez, you don't really need to be if you can do the other parts of the game well, right? But yes, I agree that I think they kind of settled at the catcher position. But there was a lot of teams, like the catching position, more so than a lot of years, was a big topic all off season. And so you felt like there was more out there. There was more that they could have done. But, things work out the way they work out, and they're with Mike Zunino now. And is it what they hoped for? Probably not, if we're being honest. But is it? Does that mean it's bad? No, I don't think so. I think it can still work out rather well for them because I like Zunino as a catcher. I think it's a good pickup, just not necessarily maybe what they were hoping for.
We saw Cleveland in the playoffs last season. A lot of people were very surprised with that, with the young core coming in, with the fact that they didn't spend any money in the offseason. They had a lot of waiver claims, if you will. It worked out for them. I wonder if we're going to see some of these other low market, low budget teams start to make that strategy. I think that might be something we do see in the future. However, was last season a fluke for Cleveland? That's a real big question that I'm curious about. Obviously, they spent money this year, so there's a step in the right direction. Will this young core that they still have get them back into a playoff contention once more this season, Sean?
I think so. And I think simply just by being in the AL Central, if for no other reason. I think that's the first thing. So I think they're in good shape there. But what I do think that I don't think they get enough credit for how they are able to play their game. Because their game is different than a lot of other playoff teams, and I think that that's something that will pay off for them again this coming season. I think that if anything, they've kind of gelled into a style of baseball that seems to have worked for them. And how can you not buy into anything Terry Francona says, right? Like there's also that with him leading the ship and the players seeing things pay off. I can't see anything being different for them. I don't know that last year was a fluke. If it was, they're going to turn it into something that changes that perception, because I think they're here to stay. I especially given how weak the rest of the division is.
92-70 last season. Yeah. Over under for this season.
That's a tough one because I think they're right around there. So I'll say under, but maybe by a game. 91 wins, 90, 91, maybe, high 80s. Low 90s, I don't think is unreasonable. What'll be interesting to see for them is fewer games against division rivals and how that impacts their overall record. Because if they were playing 18 times against the Kansas City Royals and the Detroit Tigers, that's going to have a heavy impact on how they end up. But I will take the I know you last time you said one word and I've certainly blown past that, but so I'll say the under, but just barely.
All right, I'm going to say over, and I think it's just the complete opposite. I think it's just barely as well, like 93, 94, but yeah. I'm very consistent with this team. I'm very confident this team is going to be at the top of this division again. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about that Kansas City Royals team you just talked about. They signed Jordan Lyles. They signed Ryan Yarbrough, one-year deals here. The rotation's going to look a little different. However, Jordan Lyles, he was with Baltimore last year. He looked really good. I mean, to be completely honest, his ERA wasn't as amazing as the stat line show, but he 8 innings. I'm actually a little surprised that he signed with a team like Kansas City, a team that's not expected to make the playoffs. Maybe he hopes that this is a team that he can kind of do what he did at Baltimore last year, let them get a 30-game swing like they did in years past. I don't know. But I like this Jordan Lyles pickup. It gives them an opportunity to get more innings as well. Maybe a nice bridge for some of the younger guys in Kansas City. As for Ryan Yarbrough, I got to talk about him. He's an Old Dominion faithful. He's from Old Dominion University. But he had a rough go last season for Tampa Bay. They like to put him in different positions. We saw him obviously in 2018. He was 5th in the Rookie of the Year award race. He had a fantastic rookie year. 2020 was a kind of weird year. 2021 was pretty dreadful, and last year was kind of weird as well. He's in the starter role. He's in the starting pitcher role. He's been in the bullpen as well. Ryan Yarbrough, I think, needs to find a place, and hopefully he can find that in Kansas City, no matter what it is. If there's rotation, if they decide to give him the starter role in front of some of the younger pitcher, whatever the case may be, I think they just need to find him a role. However, this rotation is going to look a little different. So far, we're not seeing Zach Greinke back at Kansas City. What's your thoughts about Eden Lyles and Yarbrough to this Kansas City squad?
Yeah, I think you're 100% bang on with Yarbrough. I think it's everybody will tell you that Tampa Bay is such a great organization because of their versatility and how they utilize players. But the flip side of that is that not every player can flip flop between roles and things like that. Yes, Yarbrough has had some injuries and stuff like that too. But those are two things that I think kind of equally share in the lack of consistent success that he's had. So I'm really hoping for his sake that Kansas City can provide him with some consistency and in a way, in an environment to establish himself again. But as you say, the rotation looks different, but really it doesn't look different, because I think what you're looking at is a rotation full of 4 to 5+ ERA rotation pieces. And that's fine. Right? Like, nobody's expecting Kansas City to win it all this year. They're very clearly rebuilding, and that's fine. So a guy who can pitch a full season and eat innings and not have, allow the Royals to not force their younger guys into roles before they're ready, I think that has value for an organization. And it allows him to kind of establish himself on a team that has no expectations, so he can stand out a bit, right? And maybe he's a summer trade target that he ends up on a contending team anyway. So there's a lot that could happen for him, but overall, I think the rotation here is it's just about kind of eating innings and getting through a season, unfortunately. And I know that doesn't sound very exciting if you're a fan of the Royals, but I think what you do have is you will have a very exciting team in short order. And unfortunately, though, you got to get through these phases of signing guys who will just eat innings or take at bats in place of rushing younger guys before they're ready.
There's a lot of exciting players on this team. I mean, we talk
100%.
about veterans like Lyles and Yarbrough, but when we talk about some players going into their second seasons, Vinny Pasquantino, another Old Dominion guy. It's like the Old Dominion Royals, so I'm really excited for this squad this year. Vinny Pasquantino, Pasquatch, if you will, he had a fun coming up last year. I really enjoyed watching him, and I think he really came on the map a little bit. If he was on any other squad other than Kansas City, he would have got a lot more recognition, but we still heard enough about him to show that he was the real deal. When you hear about that and you find out that he's playing on a team that's in last place in the AL Central, yeah, he's something that's worth mentioning. So pretty cool. I'm excited to see what Vinny Pasquantino can do this season. Another player, Bobby Witt Jr. as well. Obviously a very, very impressive player. There's some very fun young core here, and I'm just kind of talking about the top ones that we all know about. They have a good prospect system as well. They have some new management, new coaching coming in. So we'll see what they think about their pipeline, their farm system. If they think it's garbage, they think it's good. Let's see what their thoughts and their strategy is, because lately the Kansas City strategy has not worked in their favor. So maybe the turnaround could be the next few seasons. However, Vinny Pasquantino, Bobby Witt Jr., what's your thoughts about these two players moving forward in this season? Again, lots to be excited about for this squad.
Absolutely. If I'm a Kansas City Royals fan, I'm buying their jerseys immediately and wearing them very proudly. Those are two very exciting young men who are about to put Kansas City kind of back on the map, I think, soon. And Pasquantino is somebody who if you can imagine how impressive he was in his 72 game stint, next year the projections are kind of even better. 24 home runs. What's interesting with him is his walk rate last season was actually higher than his strikeout rate. 11.7 walk rate, 11.4 strikeout rate. This is a guy who can very clearly handle the bat well, and he's projected for a weighted runs created plus. I know you don't have it in front of you. I do. Take a guess at what his projected Just take a guess, because
Well, based on your home runs, based on your percentage to strikeout, I'll go one. Let's go just 121. How about that?
not even close.
Whoa.
140.
Wow.
140.
Yes.
Out of think about that, right? Like that's and what is it? Where are we at here? He's 25 years old.
Yep.
Right. Like this is something special. And if I'm a fan of the Kansas City Royals, like, and so defensively speaking, he's got his issues and base running and all of that stuff. That's not his thing, but he's a first baseman, almost the prototypical power hitting kind of good hitting first baseman. So I'm not worried about the rest of it. And as far as Bobby Witt goes, man, this guy, I don't know how. I just don't know. I don't know that there are enough words to describe how kind of exciting and electric he can be. At 22 years old, already one of the more exciting people in baseball. 30 stolen bases last year to go along with 20 home runs. And the projections have him doing more of the same. 26 home runs, almost 30 stolen bases, a weighted runs created plus of 115, almost 4 wins above replacement. And again, this guy is 22 years old. This is, this is drool-worthy stuff we're talking about. This is how Blue Jays fans feel about their first baseman and their shortstop, Vladdy and Bo. Well, Kansas City, they have a pair that is just as exciting. So if I'm a fan of the Royals, I'm loving what I'm seeing from there, and then I'm drooling over what's going to happen in the next couple of years as these two continue to just carry this team forward.
Yeah, hopefully they can find a way to add the right players around them. Another good young guy, Nick Pratto, he's a good guy to pay attention to as well for Kansas City. There's a lot of good ones in this. When do you think that they're going to move into that window to compete? How far out are they? I don't think we are at that this year, but how far are we from Kansas City saying that they are a playoff contending team?
Oh man, it really depends on the development, not just of the two that we just talked about, right? But as we've seen in Toronto and everywhere else, that having two young, exciting, elite pieces on a baseball field doesn't really amount to a whole lot, right? So the Kansas City Royals are still a few years away. I think when you start seeing them, when you start seeing them pay for a starting pitcher, like a legit starting pitcher, not an innings eater, but somebody who's actually whose purpose is to win games as opposed to placehold. That's when I think that'll be the start of it, and I think we're maybe at least 2 years away from that. I could be wrong, and I'd love to be wrong for the sake of our Kansas City Royals fans out there who are listening to this right now. I'd love to be wrong, but I think 2-3 years is probably that's how far away we are.
I think you're right. I'm going to lean more towards the 2 than the 3, though. I think they're on their way. I hope this new management gets it right. Speaking of that, 65-97 last year. They were last in the AL Central, over under on win totals, 65 in 2023.
Over. I'll take the over.
Yep, same here. I think
just because I was so hard on the rotation.
I think they're over as well, though. I think that we'll see them. I'm gonna say they are not the worst team in the AL Central this year. Well, you'll hear my projections.
They are not
at the end. All right, here we go. We are cruising through this power hour here on the OK Baseball podcast. We got 3 teams so far in the AL Central. We got 2 more to go. Let's talk about the Chicago White Sox. I would say that this was a very disappointing squad. I almost called them the most disappointing squad in baseball this year, but I'll leave that for the next team we're going to talk about. This team fell hard, though. They fell really hard this season, or last season, I should say. They lost their manager. I think that actually might be a good thing moving forward. Lucas Giolito comes in, and obviously he had some rough goes. That rotation wasn't great. Mike Clevenger joins the rotation in the offseason. They also add Andrew Benintendi. They lose Jose Abreu. There's a lot to talk about with this team in this offseason. It's very important. The offense production was just dreadful last year. This is a team that we thought was going to run away with the American League Central. I think when you saw projections across the board, with the exception of maybe some Cleveland and Minnesota local news stations, you saw Chicago White Sox was going to win this division, and they didn't even see it was close. I saw some people having Chicago as their World Series pick. However, they finished 500, 81-80 81. It was a very disappointing year. My question is, did they get any better? And can they rebound this season? Is this a team that's better than 81 wins? Don't answer that question. I want your over-under later. But with a new manager, new White Sox team, what's your thoughts? Can they rebound this season moving forward?
It's possible. There's still lots of time in the offseason, but I want to start by talking about Liam Hendriks, former Blue Jays reliever who, recently just was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Won't have any kind of word as far as when he'll be back. I think I read today that they're not even going to even take a guess until at least opening day. So he'll be out for a very long time, and all putting baseball aside right now, nothing but well wishes for Liam and his family. I fell in love with him, the Aussie. Just a character and a really genuinely good person as well. But I fell in love with him when he was in Toronto, and so I wish nothing but the best for him. Getting back to the team, this is a massive blow for them on a team that was kind of questionable to begin with. So when you lose your closer like that, like Liam Hendriks was the topic of trade talks a lot this winter, right? Like this is where the team was. Like, are they going to trade their closer? That's how bad the position is for this team. They were, it could go either way, right? So I think the rotation is good on paper. It absolutely is good on paper, but as we've seen, particularly with Clevenger dealing with injuries and Giolito as well being inconsistent, it's good on paper, but the proof will be in the pudding. And man, I just don't know how that's going to go because with Dylan Cease and Clevenger, and it looks like a good rotation, but. I just don't know if it's going to hold up to the test of a full season.
You can't think that it could be any worse than it was last year, right? Because it seems like everything just didn't go their way. And I don't know how much you blame on the management, on the coaching staff. I don't know how much you put on that, but at the end of the day, the player's the one that played the game. And I think we heard that a lot in the press conferences, that people tried to point fingers everywhere. But at the end of the day, the White Sox were taking the field, and they just weren't winning the games. It just wasn't happening for this team. They were struggling pitching. They were struggling on the offensive production. Talking about losing offensive production, not only this season, in the offseason, they get the biggest blow in offensive production with the departure of Jose Abreu. We're talking about a former American League MVP. Now is at the Houston Astros. That's a huge impact to the team. Sean, what's your thoughts on this one, on Jose Abreu taking off? I mean, that's obviously got to hurt this squad. But this is a big, not only is this a huge hit, I think, for their offensive production, but this is a guy who became the next big thing after Frank Thomas, if you will. I mean, Jose Abreu was like the face of this franchise for a very long time. Now we're seeing him in navy and orange, no longer in with the White Sox.
Yeah. So if you're looking to flat out replace Jose Abreu, I don't think you're going to. It's just not possible. But that being said, as impossible as it is, they do have Andrew Vaughn.
They do.
At 24 years old, who's looks to be their new first baseman, and that is a good place to start if you're trying to replace Jose Abreu. When you're looking at Andrew Vaughn in 134 games, he put up 17 home runs, a weighted runs created plus of 113. Not bad at all. His defense was atrocious, but I think they had him in the outfield. So if you're looking ahead to next year, 23 home runs. We're looking at a weighted runs created plus of 122. 2 wins above replacement, all from his bat. It's not going to be from his glove. I think that's a good place to start if you're going to look to replace Jose Abreu. Not that there's any pressure, of course, because I think that while, I just don't know where this team is going. I think that's the reason why I say that. Filling Jose Abreu's shoes is going to be tough. There's going to be pressure there, but the context of the team, I just don't know if there's going to be that much pressure on him anyway, right? So, anyway, long story short, you're not going to replace Jose Abreu, but they've got a pretty good start in Andrew Vaughn.
I'm with you. I have a lot of questions about this team, and I don't think we're going to be able to answer them
Yeah.
in a very long time. I think we're going to have to wait until opening day, and we might have to even wait a few weeks and to see what kind of Chicago White Sox team we're getting. To me, I feel
Mhm.
like this team can be an AL Central winner, or they can be an AL Central basement team. And I don't have an answer to which side it's going to happen. I have a prediction, but I don't have an answer to this one. I feel like I have a strong thought on all the other four teams, but this one, there's always one in these central divisions, and this year it's the Chicago White Sox. They did make a splash in the offseason. They didn't just lose. Obviously, they got Clevenger, but they bring Andrew Benintendi back to the AL Central. Obviously, he was traded to the Yankees from the Kansas City Royals at the deadline. He comes back into the AL Central this time with the White Sox. I think a lot of people think this is a huge splash. I'm not sure what I think about this one. Benintendi was great with Kansas City. He was a great leadoff batter. I think you could make the argument that he was one of the better leadoff hitters in all of baseball when he was with Kansas City. But when you're talking about adding somebody to be, maybe the next face of your franchise, I know Tim Anderson's obviously doing that right now, but Yohan Moncada has got some say in that as well. But when you're talking about another guy to come in free agency, with free agency, you always want to improve your team. They say the only way to improve your team is free agency. Trades can't do that because you're trading value, you're not adding value. I think there's some value added, but I just don't know, again, if that's enough for this team to solidify themselves as a front runner in this division.
I'm not even sold on the value that everybody assumes Andrew Benintendi brings. So here's my take on Andrew Benintendi last year. He was a decent player having a great year on a bad team at a time when people needed that kind of player. So it was almost perfect timing for him. And good for him that he was able to sort it out at the right time and turn it into a free agent contract and all that stuff. I just don't. For what he is, he's a good hitter, but I don't know that he's not going to save the White Sox. Like, that's really what it comes down to, right? So if fans are expecting that to be their big signing and that it's going to put them over the top, they're in for another disappointing season. All of your hopes cannot be pinned on Andrew Benintendi.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you with that one as well. A lot of questions for the Chicago squad, and another question for you: 81-81 last season, over under at 500. Did they make over the threshold? Did they get over 81 wins this season?
With Liam Hendricks out and the rotation having really it doesn't have question marks in the traditional sense, but it does have question marks. I'm gonna say under, unless Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez can have monster years and the rotation cannot be a question mark. Maybe, but I just, as of right now, right here, right now, they're under.
Yep. Well, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, the Chicago White Sox have the opportunity to be the best team in the Central or in the basement. With that being said, too many questions to be seen with that. I'm leaning more towards the basement, not all the way down, but towards the basement. I also say under for the Chicago White Sox. All right, let's talk about, in my mind, the most disappointing team in all of baseball last year, and I think it's Detroit Tigers. Now, I think that they had the most hype that was not answered in all of baseball last year. I mean, there was so much hype. This team are they going to be a playoff team? Could they make a push with what they added with Jose Baez? And there was just a lot of things that I think people were excited about with Detroit. There was just a lot of hype beside Detroit. I don't know if you felt that way. I definitely felt that at the beginning of last season. AJ Hinch, he couldn't get this squad in the right direction. There's a lot of things that just didn't go right with the Austin Meadows trade. You thought that was going to be a good addition for Detroit. Wound up being an absolute nightmare. We saw Austin Meadows in AL East doing great things in Tampa Bay. It just turned out to be a nightmare. Obviously, he was going through some stuff, but regardless, on the field was not doing well. They did add Matt Boyd and Michael Lorenzen to the rotation. Michael Lorenzen had some good moments with the Angels, I would say. And I think that could be a good pickup. Matt Boyd, I think, also could be a good thing as well. And then they had a crazy trade just recently, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But initially, what's your thoughts about Detroit Do you agree with me? Do you think they were the most disappointing team last year? Are you with me on board with that? And then what do you think about AJ Hinch and this squad? Do you think they can get back to just being a competitive team that we've seen in years past with Detroit?
So I never believed the hype
Okay.
about Detroit, so I'm not all that disappointed. I think it went exactly how I figured it would go. I didn't buy into Javier Baez. Is unfortunately, he's exciting. He has brilliant moments where you're like, man, that guy, he's something special. And but overall, he's not. I think he's kind of fits that kind of hype description rather well, actually. So I'm not. I wasn't disappointed in them, but I certainly see why people have been, and I see why you say that. As far as can they turn it around, I hope you're not asking about 2023 because that's like no. When Matt Boyd and Lorenzen are your your big additions, and then you trade your closer for whatever the hell that return is, you're you're asking for trouble. You might as well just put up a for sale sign on the back of everybody's jersey and hope for the best, right? Like, yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm actually surprised it took them as long as it did to trade Gregory Soto. But one thing I will highlight is that Matt Boyd and Lorenzen, they join a mediocre rotation. There's that. But what I found interesting in preparing the notes and all that stuff is Erod. He can opt out after this coming season.
Interesting.
Right? So that puts a little bit of an interesting spin on him in particular, right? So he needs a good season because I would imagine you cannot. I will not believe. I refuse to accept that he will not opt out. Why would you, on purpose, choose to play in Detroit in 2024?
If you had a bad
you know what I mean?
year, that's it. Just
right.
if you were nervous that you couldn't get a free agent deal anywhere else, you would stay, and that's the only thing. Yeah, I'm with you completely. Especially what we see with this team, 100%.
Yeah, he's opting out. He's gone. So that's the one thing I'll be paying attention to is what kind of year he has, because it could net the Tigers a nice return at the trade deadline, because he's not coming back. And they're not going to offer him a qualifying offer. So might as well give him everything he can. Give him all the technology, anything, so that he has a good season. Bubble wrap him, feed him his spinach every morning. And that's the only thing that's really going to help this team moving forward. In fact, it's going to help the team more than him playing out his contract. To be honest,
I agree with you. Yeah, they got to hire the property brothers, get them on the scouting department or the trade department so they can flip this guy. It really needs to happen. Talk about this trade. Soto goes to the Phillies. It was an interesting trade at first. I'm not going to lie. Right at the beginning, when this trade occurred, before I really dug deep in this one, I sent a message over to you, and I was curious if this was going to be our first ever WTF award here on the show. Gregory Soto, Cody Clemens heading over to Philly for Nick Maton, Matt Vierling, and Donnie Sands. Now, when I look at this a little farther, at first I was like, what is Detroit doing? What are they doing getting rid of Soto? Obviously, he's a very interesting player, if you will. I know he's got, I don't know if you want to say baggage, but there's some stuff there. And Soto, he's a great player on the field. He's got his ups and downs, but we have seen some good things from him. However, they did get 3, I would say, quality bats for a reliever that does have some ups and downs. And when I say quality, I mean they have potential. I would say 2 of those have potential to make an impact right off the bat on this Detroit team. That's not really saying much about this Detroit team, but they have an opportunity to make value right off the bat. I really like the addition of Matt Vierling. I think Matt Vierling is a perfect Detroit Tiger player when I look into this team. And the reason I say that is only because he's super fast. Super fast, and that's great for Comerica Park. And when you look at his stats, he doesn't have the best barrel rate, but he's got a very good expected batting average. If he finds a way to make that more of a line drive-ish, get it over the second base line with the speed, you're talking doubles, extra base hits all the time. So he has the potential to be a perfect Detroit Tiger player in that home stadium. So I think he's going to be my favorite player looking at that trade. I'm going to pay attention to him a lot. I think he will have the opportunity to do it. He's very versatile as well. He has a lot of major league experience at almost every position with the exception of, shortstop and catcher. So really good things as well from him. But Gregory Soto moving on from Detroit to the Phillies, it's going to look a lot different from their bullpen. And we already talked about them having a disappointing rotation. If you already have a disappointing rotation, you need to rely on your bullpen a little more to get you through games. Well, getting rid of Soto does not help that narrative, Sean.
I mean, yes and no. I think, in all honesty, they could trade Gregory Soto and have a better bullpen. Because I think what happens with closers, and anybody who has been following me since I've been doing this, I have a thing about the save stat. I think it's way overrated and overvalued. And that he might be the perfect example of that. He's got 30 saves last season. So automatically you're like, wow, that's great. That's great. He can help the Phillies. Wonderful. Okay. The problem with it is that his strikeout rate was 22.8 and his walk rate was 12.9, 13% of the batters. But another aspect of that, his home run to fly ball rate was he through his career, it's ranged between 12 and 14%, right? So average for context is 10%. So he's always been above average in a way you don't want to be above average, in that giving up fly balls and then having them turn into home runs. But he managed to, what is the only thing that I would point to as maybe some sign of positivity is that he managed to drop that all the way down to 3.4% in 2022. So maybe he's figured something out in that regard. But I think the issue for me is that walk rate is obscene for a guy that is expected to pitch high leverage innings. If that's the plan in Philly, and maybe it isn't, but for me, is it that big a loss really for Detroit? They've got Joe Jimenez, who I actually prefer as a pitcher. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. Does it make them better, worse? I don't know that it makes them as worse as people may think it does.
Interesting. I like that take. That's a really interesting take on that one. I still think Soto is a good enough bullpen piece that if you lose him, you're hurting yourself. But if they can find a way to up it, the Joe Jimenez addition this year in the trade also does help that. But we'll see what happens when the season goes. With the Detroit Tigers, there's a lot of question marks, just like the White Sox. I think they're just a little more solidified that they're just going to be not as good as we expected, and they have a lot of things to work on. And that's unfortunate because this is, and it has been reported, the last season for Miguel Cabrera. He said this will be his last year. Hopefully he's healthy for that one as he rides into the sunset. I think it's really cool, as he said, he wants to stay in baseball to help younger players. So I'm sure he'll take some kind of spot in the Detroit organization. I'm sure they'll take him with open arms. Why wouldn't you take a legend like that? What is your thoughts as we close up Detroit Tigers? What would you love to see from Miguel Cabrera as he finishes his beautiful career with Detroit Tigers and MLB?
Yeah, how can you not say an Albert Pujols-esque departure, right? I would love to see Miggy just go off and destroy everything and everyone and stay healthy. Like, that's the first thing, right? You want to see him be able to play a full season and be productive, and just absolutely go off in a way that leaves his mark. Because I think what is unfortunate is that you're right, he's such a legend and has done so much in the game of baseball and made it look easy, I'll be honest, and so I want to see him finish strong and get the recognition that he deserves, as opposed to kind of just fading off into the background. I don't want to see that for somebody of his stature.
Nope, 100%. Couldn't agree with you more. One last thing, got to put it out there. As I'm wearing the Torque Bomb shirt, I hope we get a resurrection of Spencer Torkelson and he comes back and be's that form that we hope he all could be. I really want that to happen. Detroit Tigers, 66-96 last year. They were just one game in front of Kansas City. They finished fourth in the AL Central. 66 wins in 2023, over or under?
Oh, man. I hate to say it, but I'm actually going to take the under.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I think this is going to be the worst team in the American League this year. And we haven't got to the AL West yet, but I think this is going to be the worst team in the American League. It's period. I think we're talking 100 losses, unfortunately, for the Detroit Tigers. All right, let's put it all together. As I already see we're over time here. Thank you so much for sticking with us here. As I see, we still have some watchers in. We're going to finish this off here, Sean. Here we go. 1 through 5. Once the season ends, your predictions for the AL Central.
All right, here we go. I'll start at the bottom with the Tigers. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, wow. And then in fourth place, the Kansas City Royals. In third place, the Chicago White Sox. And third, I think, is perfect because it could go either way. They're right in the middle, and it could go either way, and I wouldn't be shocked if it did. And now this is where it gets really interesting. But I feel like the Twins are going to be in second in that division, and the Guardians are the team to beat. However, Minnesota is a very scary team if everything goes well for them. I just don't see it happening, that's all.
Yeah, you know what? I think we finally agree fully on a 1 through 5 on this one. I'm with you. I think Cleveland is number 1, Minnesota is number 2. I'm with you. I think it's a lot closer than what we saw last year in this division with the obviously Cleveland winning 92 games and Chicago winning 81. I think it's a lot closer. I think we have two teams that the winner will be in the 93, 94 range. I think we have a second place at 89, 88 or something like that. It'll be a lot closer. Third place, I did give it to the White Sox. However, I think it's a lot closer with Kansas City. I think we see a big step up with Kansas City this year. Not super big. They had 65 wins last year. I think we can see them getting towards the 74, 75 mark, and that's kind of where I see Chicago right now. So I give the lean to Chicago because, again, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, but I think Kansas City could sneak up to them. And then we're going to take a mile down the road, maybe take a jump down into a hole, and then we see the Detroit Tigers. I do see them as a 100-loss team this year. Unfortunately, I just think that's happening. I hate to say it because they just have so many good young players, and Miguel Cabrera on his last year. I mean, I'd love to see that St. Louis kind of run and them sneak in the playoffs. I just don't see it happening. If they can find a way to stay at 99 losses, then I think that's a successful season for them. But unfortunately, I got them in last place for this one. Hey, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the OK Baseball Podcast. Thanks for sticking with us as we go 11 minutes over the hour, but that's what we're here. We're here to just give you some nice baseball content as we get through this offseason. AL Central is complete. The Central's done. We're getting on the plane. We're heading west, and our next episode is in the National League West. We're going to talk Dodgers, Padres, Giants, Diamondbacks, and I guess we'll talk about the Rockies as well. They haven't made a crazy pickup so far this year, but we might as well talk about them as well. Maybe is Chris Bryant still there? Did they decide that they're done with that contract yet? We're going to talk about that. Don't you worry about that. But we'll have you all covered here at the OK Baseball Podcast. If you are listening, please go ahead. Give us a like and subscribe on the YouTube page. If you're listening in podcast form, please go ahead and hit follow and give us a 5-star rating as wherever podcast you listen to, Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. It really helps us go a long way as we're building this up and getting you ready for the 2023 season. You can find Sean at Doyle, JFTC, and of course at jasonthecouch.com, where you can find all his great stuff. And you can find me at Raw Report on Twitter and slashersports.com. Take care, everyone. We will see you back here for